Welcome, people. Hello. Nice to see you all. Welcome, welcome. Very nice to see some familiar names. Hi, Eve. Hi, Lou, Cameron, Grace. Hi, nice to see you. Hi, Felicity. I'm just going to say a quick hello. Hello, hello, everybody. Just letting a few people in from the waiting room. Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for coming. While we are waiting to add a few final people into the waiting room, it would be lovely to see you introducing yourselves in the chat. Let's see if we've got any neighbours. I always like to see whether we've got anybody who doesn't realise that they're just down the road from someone else. So do say hi in the chat. Let us know which organisation you're from and where you are in the country or in the world. And we will get started very shortly. Okay. Hi in the chat. Hi, Grace. Thanks for saying hello. Joining from London today, Eve. Thank you. Ellen, based in Cornwall. Lovely. Grace from sunny Donny, just down the road from me in Sheffield. Thanks for being here. Okay, we are going to get started. I'm just going to say a few words about Fair Collective before I pass over to Flo. For those of you who are not familiar, Fair Collective is a social enterprise, a not-for-profit organisation that is essentially a matchmaker for social good organisations and consultants and freelancers. Here are some of our lovely clients. We work with organizations of all sizes, but most of our clients are smaller organizations. And that is where we've got a particular expertise and focus. But we have worked with the tiniest grassroots charities all the way up to large international and national organizations. Just letting a couple more people in. So essentially, our role at Fair Collective is to find charities, people who can help them with freelance and consultancy support, and we match them. So we have over 100 charity sector specialists covering all those things you can see there on the right, everything from grant writing to HR support, DEI, independent evaluations, finance, digital marketing, basically everything you can think of. We've tried to curate this collective of associates that can help you with anything that you might need. We do day rates by organization income level to try and make sure that really excellent freelance and consultancy support is available for organizations of any shape and size. It's a free service for our clients. So you as the charity don't pay anything for us finding you this talent. And we donate at least 50% of our profits to the small charity sector through pro bono work, through funding grassroots movements, through advocacy and kind of campaigning on behalf of the sector for a fairer sector for us all. So, thank you for being here today. We know that time is one of your most precious resources, so we're really grateful to you for giving us some of your time today. We've got Flo here today who's going to talk to us about campaigning, and I'm going to let Flo introduce herself in a moment. Just a few sort of housekeeping rules and bits and pieces for our session today. Closed captions are available if you need them. You can make sure that those are on using the toolbar at the bottom. We will be using the chat today, so feel free to ask questions as we go in the chat, and I'll be helping Flo to monitor those. And we'll have a dedicated Q&A section at the end. If you are able, do pop your videos on so we can see you. It always helps to give us a sense that we are kind of all together in this space, but it's absolutely fine if you would prefer to or need to have your camera off for whatever reason. You're very welcome to sit with your camera off and just enjoy listening. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to pass over to Flo now. And Flo, thanks so much for being here.
Hi everyone. Hi. Thanks, Vic. That's a lovely introduction. Yeah, I'm Flo Stewart Leach or Florence. I don't really mind what people call me. And this session is about campaigning that cuts through. So particularly with a sort of a practical focus on steps that small and medium charities can take. So hopefully you're in the right place at this point. I'll do a bit more of an introduction about who I am in just a second. But first, what I would love is just to hear a little bit more from you all. So I know that lots of people have already said what they do in the chat, which is really nice. It's a really nice range of organisations and things people are coming from. Um, but what kind of campaigner are you? So I've given you some options here. Sorry, they're a bit cheesy, but if you just have a little read through and think sort of where do you sit on this spectrum? So maybe you're someone who's already got a strategy, you might have a campaign plan almost ready to go and maybe need a bit more sort of confidence to get it out there. Or maybe you're sort of at the other end of the spectrum and you're a total newbie to campaigns. And in that case, it would just be really lovely to just sort of see the range of different people coming to the room and yeah, we can see what sort of experiences you've all got. So that would be really nice. And while you're doing that, I'm just going to introduce myself a little bit more. So I'm a comms and campaigns consultant, and I've been working with not-for-profits of sort of all shapes and sizes over the last 12 years. And the last 8 years, I've focused specifically on campaigns. So working with sort of huge organisations like Greenpeace and even like big project with the UN last year, down to sort of tiny organisations as small as two members of staff, trying to get campaigns off the ground. So I mean, I really think that change comes in all shapes and sizes. And so, based on that experience from a wide range of different campaigning organisations, and also sort of campaigns that I've seen out in the wild, I've really tried to distill what I think are some of the key things which make campaigns effective and what really make them cut through to the audiences who need to see them. So, let's see what. Ah, nice. Okay. Fire starter, I love it. Great. Okay, we've got some newbies. That's really nice. And campaign adjacent. Yeah, I think this is a really important one actually, because I think some of the challenges that we're facing and that we're working on are really huge and really urgent. And so I really think we need campaigners more than ever in this world. So there's loads that we can learn from campaign strategy and tactics and tools. And hopefully there'll be something in this presentation for everybody on this group. Okay, so let's get into it. Um, when I was thinking about what makes a campaign land, I suppose you can break it down into all kinds of different categories, but the things that sort of made the most sense to me were thinking about strategy, because I think that that's, I suppose that applies across all areas of work. But without a strategy in the campaigning world, things can get really chaotic really quickly. So that's my number one area, and we're going to spend sort of the first 25-ish minutes of this webinar purely focusing on strategy. And some of the tools and things that you can use to bring your campaign strategy to life. And then secondly, looking at creativity. So we really need to get noticed in these increasingly crowded spaces. And I think that requires bringing a huge amount of creativity to your tactics and to your execution. So we're going to look at some examples just to give you a bit of inspiration, and then also a few sort of thoughts about how you can maximize your creativity regardless of the role that you're sitting in. And then finally, and unfortunately, we'll only have a tiny bit of time to dedicate to this, but I think it's really important, is resilience. We know that basically change doesn't happen overnight. In fact, it can take a really long time. So being resilient in ourselves and also in terms of the organization that we're working with is so important. And I just have a few thoughts to share on this. So, and also I'm going to sort of talk about lots of different tools and resources and things along the way, but don't worry, you don't have to sort of take notes. I will also share slides at the end of this, and we have a slide at the end which is just resources that have come up throughout this presentation. And then also we'll make time, as Vic said, at the end for questions. So if there's anything I don't cover, which there will be an awful lot because this is a huge topic to cover in just under an hour, then yeah, just save it for the end and we can maybe come back to it. So Starting at the beginning with strategy, I'm just going to run you through a few quite simple tools, which I personally find really helpful. And I've used them with small charities, with big ones, regardless of the scope of your issue. I think that these can be really effective. And I think the very first thing to do is really just to understand the problem that you're working on. And I mean, as I said, without strategy, I think that we can start to get into this quite chaotic kind of mode quite quickly. But I think understanding your problem is the first step towards carving out your strategy. And so this tool is the problem tree. And it's super simple. It's as simple as it looks. It's really a tree in which you can visualize your problem, but not only the problem, the root causes that are affecting it, and then also the sort of symptoms and impacts of the issue. So here's an example. This is quite a big example, global hunger. But if you look at the trunk, the problem that you're working on, this could be any of the things that you guys have mentioned in the chat. It might be plastic pollution, or it could be air pollution, or something, one specific tangible issue that you're currently working on. And then the root causes. I think this exercise is quite useful to do as a team, actually, and you can sort of map out your issue in relation to the root causes and the effects and impacts. But the roots should be really the underlying causes of the problem. So these could be things like government policies, public attitudes, corporate behaviours, whole wealth of things. And then finally, when you're looking at the branches, these are the things that they're like the symptoms of the problem. These are the things that your audiences and the public are really experiencing in their everyday lives. These are the things that are impacting people. So whether or not they understand it as a result of the problem that you're focusing on remains, that remains unanswered, but it's something that you can come back to later on in the campaign. So what's the point of this exercise? Well, there's a few things. Firstly, this can really help you to identify different areas that you could campaign on. So if you're at the point in your journey where you know you want to make change on an issue, but you don't really know where to get started, then this is where you can map out all of the possible options for you to get started and issues to focus on to focus your campaign around. And one important thing to say is that a good campaign is always trying to fix the roots, not the branches. So if you think of a good doctor, for example, they might try and treat your symptoms, but they wouldn't necessarily be solving the problem as a whole. So if you want to be a good doctor or a good campaigner, you're really looking at the root causes, and that's what you want to get to the bottom of in this exercise. Another thing that I think it can be really helpful for, especially for sort of smaller organizations, is that it might help you to understand your gaps. Now, I think that sometimes we're working on really focused issues and we don't necessarily understand the wider context, or we haven't spent that much time on it. But I think if you try to fill out this tree and you're struggling, maybe you're not sure about what the root causes are, or you only know one or two of them, that's kind of a cue for you to go away and do a bit more research, or maybe speak to other people who are working in the area. And then finally, and I already mentioned it, those branches that are like the symptoms, um, those are going to be really useful to you later on in the campaign. So those are the visible things, the tangible things that people are picking up on. So keep hold of those branches, because later on they could be really helpful entry points for your different audiences. And they can also provide ideas for an absolute wealth of content for later on in the campaign as well. So yeah, this is one to like work on as a team, or on your own if you're a team of one, of course. But also useful to get input from other people, and then stick it up somewhere prominent and really remember like what it is that you're trying to tackle here. So the next tool, now that we've had a bit of a look at the problem, what do we think the path to change actually looks like? And how can you work out what value you add to that sort of broader movement for change? So this is where the social grid change comes in, social change grid, sorry. And this is a tool from the Sheila McKechnie Foundation. I don't know if people have heard. Maybe it'd be useful to hear in the chat actually if some of you have heard of some of these organizations and tools and resources, because it's really good to hear from other people aside from me that these are great places to look at. So Sheila McKechnie Foundation, they have loads of really useful resources and free tools and templates. And this is one of them. And basically, this is supposed to visualize how change happens. And it's based on the theory that any successful movement for change requires elements of community, personal, public, and institutional activity. And this, as you can see, it's sort of mapped onto four quadrants. So I'll talk through them each quickly. But the top left represents community power. So this is any activity where people come together as a community of interest, and that could be sort of in person or online. It could be things like local businesses, social enterprises, faith groups, but also think like your local sort of street WhatsApp group, which I'm sure lots of us are part of, for better or for worse. Um, and then on the bottom left, we've got individual experience. So that's where people can bring their own first-hand experience of an issue and then tell their story in one way or another, or maybe they start to organize for change. And so I'm thinking, for example, I'm working on a campaign about extreme weather at the moment, and we've gathered some people who have all been affected by flooding, and it's been so interesting to hear their stories, and they've got so much to offer this campaign, which is much more sort of impactful than anything that an organization can say sort of from its own channels and its own voice. And then in the top right corner, we've got like the public realm. So this is the media. This is also sort of public protest, boycotts, stunts, social media. This is the sphere in which sort of public discourse happens and public narrative begins to change. So this area is super important. It's a really the really visible end of campaigning a lot of the time, I think. And then finally, in the bottom right corner, we've got sort of the suits of our different industries. So thinking of like the people who have the formal powers to make the change, and that could be obviously government, so MPs, local councillors, also regulators. If you're working on an international campaign, it could be the UN, the EU, also big businesses, and I think like even big charities actually fit into this quadrant. So thinking about maybe if you've got allies who are big charities, they're also quite relevant here. Now, I know this is a lot to absorb, so I've got an example for you, which should help to sort of paint a picture of what this really looks like. So this is an example from a little while ago, actually. It's 2022. It was the Freedom from Torture campaign to stop the flights. It's actually like an award-winning campaign now. You can read about it in lots of different places because it was such an effective campaign. And I think one of the things they did really well is that they were super focused about how they were going to achieve the thing that they set out to do. So they obviously their campaign was aimed at at dismantling the Rwanda scheme. But there were so many ways they could have tackled that. And the way that they chose was to make it unviable by targeting the airlines to stop them from taking on those contracts. And obviously, a few airlines had already been lined up and had contracts with the government to take on the Rwanda scheme when it was up and running. And Freedom from Torture successfully made all four of those airlines pull out because of public pressure and all of these different tactics. So I think it's a really brilliant example of how a really targeted, really focused campaign can create change. And we've got the benefit of time as well, benefit of hindsight to see that it did actually work, and it's, it's a nice one to look back on. But in terms of the social change grid, you can map all of their tactics onto this grid, and you'll see that they touched on every single quadrant. So according to the Sheila McKechnie Foundation, they would say that's why it was successful, because they managed to bleed into all of these different areas. So just a few examples. This top right corner image where this is like a spoof advert that they did for one of the airlines, Privilege Style. And I think that they use that across social media and other places, but basically it penetrated into this sort of public sphere space. They had things like, well, they had refugee voices speaking up and telling their stories, and also organising for themselves. They collaborated with loads of other organisations in the sort of community space. So Stop Deportations and Corporate Watch, which you can see in the top left corner. And ultimately, yeah, it was like incredibly successful. I don't know if people remember this, or interesting to see if anyone has any thoughts on this campaign, but I think it's a really nice example. So in terms of how you can use this, I think this we're looking at this with hindsight and mapping this on after the fact. But I think it's a super useful tool to use before in your planning stages because you can use this empty quadrant and we can provide a template for this, but it's pretty simple. Um, in which you sort of map your issue onto these axes. And I think what it can help you to do is to spot opportunities. So if you sit down either by yourself or with colleagues or with other people who are maybe working on the issue, you can brainstorm ideas to fit into each of these quadrants and think through what would really move the dial on our issue within each of these quadrants. And once you've done that, I think that can really help you also to prioritize your tactics and start to populate a campaign plan. It also should show up where you might have some gaps. So it might be that you can't possibly think of a community aspect to this campaign, or you just don't have access to communities who you think would be interested in getting involved. And that's a real signal to you to think, okay, who can I partner with? Who are my allies in this space? And then you can also start to plot onto this grid other people who are working in the space who you think that you should be collaborating with. And in terms of like what you can take forward from this, I think that this is an awful lot. Most organizations can't do all of these things, and that is totally fine. And I think, especially for small and medium-sized organizations, it's too much and it will only be distracting to try and achieve all of these things. But I think what you want to do is understand the broader context of change and then identify one, two, maybe three things that you can really affect or that you could bring to fruition. Um, yes, so let's move on from that. But if anyone's got any questions, like please do pop into the chat and I can answer questions as we go along because I appreciate some of these might take a little bit of getting used to. Also, if you've used them before, I'd love to know that too as well. Like if you've used these before and have any experiences to share, that's nice to hear. So now, having moved through some of those exercises, you should have identified an issue that you want to work on, that you want to focus on, and also visualized what the change could look like. And now it really is as simple as coming to a decision about what to focus on and articulating it. And this is sort of my theory of change section. And I think a lot of people would encourage you to do some huge template with loads of different levers and things that and unexpected consequences and these huge maps of theory of change that you can get all across different industries and organizations where they really want you to map out every possible scenario. But I would actually encourage you to just write it in one line. So, at its very simplest, a theory of change is really just the logic of the campaign that you're working on. And if you can articulate it in this one line, then I think that you're onto a really good thing. So, yeah, we've got an example here. If we get parents to write to local councillors about air pollution near schools, we believe it will increase political pressure for clean air zones. It's as simple as that. So if anyone's got one to hand, please do pop it in the chat. That would be nice to see. But I appreciate that that might be quite tricky off the top of your head. I think that one thing on theory of change is that once you've got this one line, I think it's also really important that it is that simple so that you can repeat it because so many campaigns rely on you being able to bring other people into your movement and explain to them the concept and get them to buy in. So the simpler, the better, really. And I would also say it's something that you want to keep telling your audiences to reinforce why what they're doing is important and to keep them invested, especially as you try and sustain them over a longer term campaign. So, the last sort of big strategic question that you will come across, and I think is absolutely crucial before you move forwards, is who are your audiences? So I think one of the traps that so many organizations, big and small, fall into is that they waste really precious resources on trying to reach too many people and trying to talk to everyone. And honestly, it is a waste of time. There are some people who serve no purpose really in your theory of change and for your campaign. And I think the sooner you can embrace that, the better, because it's actually quite freeing. It's so nice when you can just rule out a whole load of people and also the channels that come with them. So instead, what you want to do is focus on just two or three maybe key audiences, depending on the size and scope of your campaign. But let's say two or three. And I think you'll probably find that that who those people are has sort of naturally fallen out of the processes that you've already gone through up until now. So you might have a short list already, but if you haven't, I think that these are the sort of key questions you should be asking yourself. So who has the power to make the change? And this is your primary audiences, and this is what you in this sort of category, you're thinking of, again, those decision makers probably. It might be like an MP, it might be a minister, or it might be a business, or it might be a specific person in a business, like a sustainability lead or a team, a group of people. Think about who those people are. Who are the people who can make the change that you want to see? And then your secondary audiences are the people who can influence them. And this actually does get quite creative. And I'm going to show you through an example of some audience segmentation I did not too long ago. But yeah, it could be quite simple. It could just be constituents, or it could be customers of a certain brand. But yeah, think through all of your different options here. And then in order to narrow those down, I think what you need to do is think realistically, who can we reach from our organization or via partners or influencers? And then that's where you get the really tricky question of like, can we really reach all of those people? And I just think it's so important to be really realistic with yourself about who you can reach. We certainly can't reach everyone. And once you've got those audiences, what you want to do is think through like, where do you want them to be? What do you want them to think? What do you want them to feel? And what do you want them to do? And this is sometimes called empathy mapping. So I'm not going to go into any more information on this, but you can sort of write these up in a grid to help you remember, to help you stay focused to what you're trying to achieve with each of the audiences. So here's a little case study for you. Um, I recently ran a campaign with Count Us In, which is a small charity. The campaign is called Green Football's Great Save. So if you're a football fan, is anyone a football fan? I'm actually not, but in a way, it was quite nice having a bit of distance from the issue. And being able to look at it objectively. But basically, this is a campaign aimed at football fans as a way to look at climate and target this sort of movable middle, these people who maybe don't engage with climate on a daily basis, but actually they could have a really big impact when it comes to influencing policymakers or and also like the sports industry and football industry specifically. So if you are a football fan, you might have heard of this because we had the incredible advantage of support from Sky Sports, and they televised quite a lot of elements of the campaign. But it was actually run by a really tiny charity and with a really small team, only about six full-time staff and small budgets. So I think it's really kind of incredible what you can achieve on kind of limited resources. And just to sort of summarize, like the theory of change was to harness the power of the footballing community to establish progress on climate and nature. Oh, you've heard of it? Yeah, amazing. That was really good. Um, and so how the campaign played out was that in March we had a 3-week window, and we decided to focus on sports kit and clothing as an issue. A sort of you could see that as one of the branches on the tree from the problem tree. That this is one of the things that plays out in terms of an unsustainable footballing industry. So we focused on sports kit and clothing. And we chose it partly because it's an interesting issue for fans. So it's got a lot of emotional resonance. There's so much storytelling you can do around it. And we also know it's a huge problem. So like 100,000 tons of football kit gets thrown away each week, football kit and sportswear. And actually, what we were asking fans to do was to rethink how they used their what they did with their sports kit when it was no longer in use. And we were asking people to sell, donate, or reuse it, and also sort of spread information and awareness about this as an issue. And then the sort of longer term theory of change is that with football fans taking action on an issue like this and actively engaging with it, it gives football clubs and then by extension governments who actually love to profess to be like football fans and be interested in huge industries that have access to millions and millions of fans, leeway to actually be a bit bolder in their change and their climate change commitments. Um, so that's the sort of the crux of the campaign. And happy to take some questions on it afterwards because it's actually quite a wide-ranging one. But in terms of audience selection, these are some of the key audiences that we landed on. I'm just going to move the meeting chat so I can see them a bit better. And so I'm not going to talk through all of these. Some of them are sort of quite clear. But in terms of prioritizing who we were speaking to and why, you can see on the left-hand side, we've got some people who we thought we're not going to try and engage them really fully. We just want to reach them in some way or another. And one of those is club fans. There are about 8 million football fans in this country. We were obviously not going to reach 8 million football fans, and that's okay, and we accepted that. But we did put them as a key audience in terms of if we could reach them with one piece of content, that would be amazing. So we've put those into the sort of awareness category on the left-hand side. And then everyone on the right-hand side, these are all audiences that are a bit more focused and we could reach with more focused content and give them some quite specific calls to action. So we've got grassroots players, football families, and community subcultures. And so one of those is football expressionists, which I think is, I'm not going to go through all of these audiences, but football expressionists are quite an interesting one. They represent a really tiny proportion of football fans, but they, in terms of resonance and their sort of presence in the football fan world, they really sort of punch above their weight. And so we really wanted to reach them for this like narrative campaign because we felt that they were the ones who could really spread the message to other fans. And actually, that is exactly what they did. And they helped us from like these absolutely tiny channels. We had a tiny Instagram channel and not much else, to be honest. They were the ones who really helped to spread our content and our messaging and reach sort of thousands and thousands more people. So, just to tell you a little bit more about them, they are the people who are sort of already interested in climate and social issues, but they're also trendsetters. They're like really online. They have really loud voices. They're like they tend to sort of lead the way in terms of what's cool, and they're interested in fashion. And there's this big sort of overlap between football, fashion, culture. So yeah, so given our objectives around sort of reaching people with this sort of narrative change, they seemed like a really good fit. And I suppose what I wanted to share in terms of like the process that we took to reaching these audiences or to sort of reaching our decision to prioritize these audiences is that it might look kind of slick how we've got them all kind of labeled in our graph, but actually it was really quite I suppose, quite a lo-fi process that we went through. We used a combination of sort of instinct and experience, and then just existing intelligence about all these different audiences that we could get hold of. So, as I said, I'm not a football fan, but some of the other people I was working with are huge football fans and were able to speak to different types of fans and who gets engaged and who doesn't. And then we mapped that against some of the existing research about different audience segments. And I think that once you've started to look at who you want to reach, once you start Googling and doing some research, you'll find that there is so much out there. You really don't need to do your own expensive research to learn more about who you're reaching. Um, while I lose my voice a little bit, let's move on to the next slide. Because this is where we move on to creativity. So now that you've kind of chosen who your audiences are, how do you actually connect with them? How do you sort of reach them in a really noisy and distracted world? And this is, I love this quote. The role of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. I think you could swap out the artist for the campaigner here, actually, because I think creativity is such a crucial campaign tool. And we've seen over and over again that facts don't really move people. They don't tend to win arguments, not in any real way, not in the public sphere. They don't tend to be the things that drive change. So, how do you really connect with your audiences? And I think first we're just going to go through some examples and then I'll come back to some of the key points on this. So, coming back to our football expressionists, what we did to try and reach them, given that what they love, we know that they love obviously football, but they also love the sense of community around it and they love fashion. So, um, a couple of things that we did. One was that we approached designers who work on sustainability and who were interested in doing something on football and sustainability and climate change. And we had this like actually really interesting response, and we ended up working with Christopher Rayburn, who people may have heard of him if you're interested in fashion or in sustainable fashion specifically. Basically agreed to produce a range of exclusive bags that were made from old football kits and then upcycle them into these what he calls kit bags. So that photo on the left is one of the kit bags. And they're actually like they're such beautiful products. I went to his studio and met him and saw the products, and they're really lovely. And he basically just got bought into the campaign because he thought the issue was really interesting, and so we were incredibly grateful for all of his time and resources that he donated to this. And in terms of reaching our audiences, this one was incredible. This really traveled. So our football expressionists loved this and they shared it. And they also it also meant that it got picked up by other channels that they're interested in. So places like Hypebeast, for example, also shared this. And so when you're not gifted with, very big channels or a big brand name, it's you if you can create something that's beautiful and shareable, then other people will do that work for you and share your message. So yeah, so that was a really successful one for us. And then on the other hand, we have things like just some storytelling that we did with real people talking about why they love football and some of the nostalgia around the game and around football kits. So, for example, we did this series where we asked people, so like grassroots players and others, more professional players as well, who like what are their favourite shirts, their favourite retro football shirts, and it really tapped into a conversation that football fans are already having. And it was through these kinds of like fun and like playful pieces of content that we could then insert more campaign messaging. So like all of these stories ultimately came back to the point of don't throw away your old football kit, love it, reuse it, cherish it, and yeah, and that campaign messaging really traveled. And then another example, I love this one. This is really current campaign that probably lots of people have seen. I think it launched sort of last autumn, called the Dad Shift, and essentially it's such a simple concept, and I think that's why it's really cutting through. They're campaigning for better paternity leave in the UK, and as far as I'm aware, it's a team of just two people, so they're doing incredibly well for like limited resources, and the ambition is really clear. So they're really just trying to improve paternity leave in the UK, and they have really clear facts and statistics to back up why it's important. Apparently, the UK has the worst paternity leave in the whole of Europe, so that gives them quite a good sort of motivation and a really easy way to explain why this is quite shocking, actually, the state of paternity leave in the UK. And then, in terms of like where the creativity comes in here, is that they've done some really nice sort of interventions, really simple, really low cost, and very effective. So, did anybody see these statues statues all around London that they dressed up with babies and slings? It was like Yeah. Yeah, that's the first time I heard of this campaign and it really caught my attention. Um, so yeah, I really like this one. I think it's got like a it's really nice and sort of tongue in cheek and it's simple, it's eye-catching, and it got quite a lot of media attention. And literally all they did was they walked around central London. Obviously they planned it really, really well, but they also ultimately were just walking around London putting these sort of slings and babies on famous statues. So yeah, I really like that one. They were also another thing is that they're working with lots of allies in the space. So coming back to that thing of how you always need to find your allies and like work together as a movement, they're doing that exact thing. So they're working with Dope Black Dads, for example, which is like a podcast and a digital community. Movember, I think, and then also Pregnant Then Screwed, which is one of our friends at Fair Collective. Um, so I suppose what is it that really, if we had to summarize, like what is it in terms of creativity that we really need to bring to our campaigning tactics? There are so many things you could say about this, but I'm just going to highlight a few things that I think are important and have come through in these examples. Um, One is that I think that tactics need to be like fun and surprising and joyful. And that's not to say I think there is absolutely space for um, things to be terrible and like emotive in a really negative way. I think that that also needs to happen. But I think don't underestimate the power of stuff which actually just speaks to people's real interests and loves and and sense of fun. Like I think that that is also we can also do that as campaigners. We don't have to focus on the issue in a way which is necessarily going to make us all feel sad. But yeah, that accessing that full range of emotion I think is quite important. Also, I mean, I've said a few times that like facts don't cut through in the way that I think that we want them to. So there is lots of evidence to support this. There's, for example, Frameworks Institute, I think you might be aware of. They're absolutely amazing for coming up with research-based guidelines on how to communicate about different issues. And they found over and over again that the things that really get people's attention and actually move people, is like values-based framing, metaphors, narratives, not facts. So while facts have a place in your campaign, they shouldn't be the thing that you lead with. Um, yeah, and then I think unexpected partnerships. This one, so I think some of the things that we've looked at are sort of traditional creativity, like what does a fun action look like? What does creative content look like? But also think about creative allies, like how can you engage people who can sort of do that creativity for you, but also people who maybe they're like the sorts of organizations or individuals that people and the public wouldn't expect you to ally with. Like who could those people be for your campaign? Um, and finally, I think that sort of um, it's important to remember, like, you can feel really under pressure to come up with like wildly creative ideas all the time. But there are so many like tools and things available to help you with this. It's not all on you. One tool which I really love is Beautiful Trouble, which is a website which you can access. It's in my list of resources as well. But they do loads of training, they do so many things, but one thing that I really love is their campaigners toolkit, and they have listed there's I think maybe even like loads and loads, maybe even hundreds of campaign tactics all listed out. And so if you're ever struggling to think, okay, I know who I want to reach, I know what we're trying to say, I've answered all of those strategic questions, but what on earth do we do now for a tactic? I would really recommend just visiting that website and having a look through some of those tactics. And yeah, and like for sure it will take you to some interesting places, I think. Um, and finally, when you're working with creatives, so some of those examples previously were about working with professional creatives, designers, and artists, comedians. Think about all the different types of creatives you could possibly get interested in your cause. Um, I think one really important thing is just to engage with them early. So allow them to shape the tactic for you. It's not all on you. That's not necessarily what you're here to do. So I think just remembering that and trying not to sort of like feel too under pressure to be the most creative person in the room. It's that can be hard. Um, Beautiful Trouble was the name of the website. Do you ever? Yeah. Okay, so finally, moving into this very last section, and I did say this would be brief, but I think it's important, is we know that change takes so long, like far longer than it really should. And for that, I think we all need to sort of give ourselves a bit of resilience, both as individuals, but also kind of in the movement. It's really important to think about how we're going to prepare for the long haul, how we're going to keep the campaign going, and how we're going to sort of stay motivated for ourselves and for supporters. So, I mean, like one of the most frustrating things that I see across campaigning organizations is that campaigns can fizzle out after sort of 3 to 6 months. Like they might have a really promising start and it's all really exciting, but actually they burn out and they've used all their tactics in the first few months, and then, things don't quite, they can't quite get the buy-in, or budget runs out. There are so many reasons. Um, I think what I really want to encourage you to do when you're thinking of your campaign strategy and your campaign plan is to think about how will you sustain this for at least 12 to 18 months? Like what does that look like? And I think that can be quite daunting, especially if your resources are tight or if there aren't many people working on this with you. So just a few quite simple tips, I think, to which will hopefully help. So one is to think about consistency. So pace yourself. Like you really don't have to do everything in the first 3 months. Um, and I think consistency and constancy are two really different things. You don't have to be present everywhere all at once. Think about the channels that you will be present on. Or if you don't have social media, maybe you don't need it. Maybe you just need a really good, solid website presence. I think, really thinking through what are the things that you need and how do you keep those running for at least 12 to 18 months is really important. And if it means scaling back a little bit, then I think do it just for your own sort of, you really don't want to be burning out. Um, and yeah, be responsive, not reactive. So this is where I think there's a difference between, say, there's some news coming up that's related to the thing that you're working on. You don't have to respond every time. You can really just pick and choose which are the opportunities which will actually move your campaign forwards. And this is where you just need to remain sort of doggedly focused on your theory of change. Like come back to it. Does responding to this thing actually help me with my theory of change? Um, and yeah, so rethinking success, I think this is quite a big one because so many, I think a lot of the time there's like pressure to have KPIs and to be able to show impact in numbers. But a lot of the time, that's not really how what change looks like. It can take a really long time, but also it's not necessarily all neat and packaged up in the way that you want it to be. So I think through some other metrics, things that indicate that you're making progress that you can come back to and remind yourself that you are moving forwards. And sometimes that can be just really as simple as getting some really good qualitative feedback, or are your supporters still showing up for the cause? I think these are just as important as like these other campaign wins. And finally, building a sense of community is just absolutely crucial. I think in terms of sort of individual campaigner resilience and mental health, try and surround yourself with people who are also doing the same thing. So things like this, like a really good start, but also there are loads of communities out there. For example, eCampaigners Forum, another one that I will link to in my resources, but they're amazing, and it's like a community of thousands of campaigners from all around the world, and people like post questions in there and get responses and advice, and sometimes just share like how they're getting on with their campaigns. So I think I'll leave you with that because we're quickly running out of time, and I can see Vic's ready for questions shortly. But just so you're aware, these are the resources that I'm going to send round. And if I've mentioned any other that aren't here, or if there are any others you'd like me to signpost to, do let me know, either in the comments or by email. And then finally, yeah, it'd be lovely to stay in touch. I offer like a free campaign power hour once a week to any organization that feels like they just want a little bit of advice, and we can talk through your individual campaign. And yeah, I can offer just sort of on the spot advice just to help you get started or rethink your approach or something like that. Any kind of issue you want to bring. So yeah, get in touch if you're interested in that as well. And I will, yeah, hand back to you, Vic. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I have relocated to be closer to the small human who's on his like 27th episode of Peppa Pig today, unfortunately. I'm planning to get him outside in the garden after this. That was so interesting. Thank you so much for that, Flo. Um, do you want to take your slides down and I shall put a spotlight on you, and we'll do some questions. Lovely. Thank
Sounds
you.
good.
So yeah, thank you so much. I hope you all found that as interesting as I did. And know there are a couple of questions in the chat, and do feel free to add more questions into the chat, or if you would prefer, just to unmute and raise your hand. Let's start with the question from Hannah. Could you suggest some other public case studies where the change sought is attitudinal rather than a change to a specific policy implemented by a particular body? So, for example, you want to stop restaurant staff from refusing to serve disabled people. The law already prohibits this behaviour, but the problem is compliance, awareness, attitudes, etc. Do you have any thoughts on that, Flo?
Yeah, I do. I think so. What this is getting at is more of a behavior change kind of a campaign, which is quite different. Um, I mean, often a lot of the same kind of strategic questions apply, but yeah, you are dealing with a slightly different set of issues and ways of approaching it. I think what you would want to do, sorry, I know you've asked for a specific case study. I can't think of a specific one other than the one I did with World Health Organization last year, which I can reference. But I think what you would want to do in approaching this is come back to a sort of behavior change model specifically. So I don't know if you're familiar with COM-B, which is about sort of like how you kind of reinforce different behaviors and how you encourage people to behave differently. I think that will be a big part of a campaign like this, if I've understood correctly from what you've said. And I think, yeah, just to give you a quick example of one that I worked on was I worked on a campaign with the World Health Organization who were aiming to change attitudes to alcohol consumption. So it was quite a big, quite a tricky one. And yeah, we use lots of behavior change theories to underpin that. Um, and I won't go into detail on it, but I mean, maybe Hannah, I can share with you some links about that later. Yeah, we could even chat a bit more. Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for the question, Hannah, and thanks, Flo. Okay. Does anyone else have a comment, a question? Feel free to ask a specific question about perhaps your own cause. Often your question and the answer can be helpful for other people as well. Just going to give it a couple of minutes to see whether any questions crop up in the chat. Oh, glad to hear it, Helena. Helena's just saying, don't have any specific ideas, but keen to take some of them forward, definitely. I've got a bit of a question. Oh, here's one coming from Rebecca. If an org doesn't have any public social channels, can they still run effective interventions?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I mean, social channels can really like sap energy and resources. So if they don't have a very specific purpose, then I actually think, yeah, maybe you should actually get rid of them. Like it can take up so much energy. So thinking through if they're actually useful to you is one thing. If you don't have social channels and maybe you can't run them and you don't see a purpose for them, then there are so many other ways that you can make really effective sort of campaign interventions. So I mean, lots of things. So one thing is that sometimes a really effective campaigning tactic is to reach your decision makers directly. And I don't know if anyone's heard of the Craftivist collection, but they're really brilliant for they have a quick look, like maybe on Instagram or something, at some of the things that they do. But for example, I heard about one campaign that they ran where they got just like a small number of people to hand stitch notes to people on the board of Tesco because they wanted to influence them about something. I can't remember what it was, sorry. And they had like tailored the little hand stitched notes and embroidered them according to things that they knew that the person on the board really liked. So it was like this really creative intervention, and it was straight to the people who were going to make the change. And it like the public played no role in that. They didn't need to publicize it or talk about it on their social channels. So yeah, absolutely, there are so many things that you can do. And then the other point I would just come back to is that, as I said in the presentation, I think that when you come up with a really compelling story about something that needs to change, and you've got really interesting ways of telling that story, other people will carry that message for you. So, think about sort of influencers or allies in the space. Like, it really doesn't need to be coming from your own channels. So, yeah. So basically, my answer is yes, you can definitely still run really effective campaigns without big channels or any channels.
Brill, thank you. And another question from Timmy. Are there any specific differences to a strategy when you're running a campaign with children and young people?
Oh, interesting. Could you say more about that to me? Like, what in terms of, do you mean to reach young people, or because you're working with young people, or yeah, any more sort of context would be helpful. Sorry, Timmy, to put you on the spot.
If you'd like to add more context, you can put that in the chat or feel free to unmute and explain a bit more.
Yeah, I can explain. So in terms of working with young people during the campaign, and then also the campaign reaching young people, so children and young people, so sort of 11 to 25-ish.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the strategic process, I think, remains the same. It's just that there are different considerations. I mean, obviously, thinking about safeguarding, if you're working with young people directly, then, and maybe I suppose that's something that you already do in your organization, so we'll be well aware of what you can and can't do. I think that's really important. But also in terms of the tactics that you're looking at, I think just be prepared to sort of like draw up an ethical kind of code of conduct about what you're prepared to do. I mean, for example, in the Green Football campaign, we wanted to reach footballing families, including like, and we decided to go for the parents of children rather than children themselves, because while you can actually target young people on social media and in other spaces, we decided that sort of went against our ethical code of conduct. So I think just like thinking through those questions, how are you actually going to reach children if they're your audiences? Yeah, it might just take a bit more thinking through. But in terms of the strategy, I think a lot of that remains the same.
I am being summoned from the living room because the TV's not working. Sorry. That's really interesting and a great question to ask, Timmy. Thank you. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. Does anybody have any final questions before we close? My question, if I can try to remember what it was going to be, yeah, I mean, there are some brilliant examples of smaller organizations who've really kind of packed a punch with these kind of campaigns. And one of the things you mentioned in your presentation was about like trying to connect with creative talent or like trying to connect with people who might be able to amplify your voice. And I wondered if you had any advice for charities or individuals who feel as if like they don't have any warm contacts, they don't have anybody in their network. I know that's something that I've really felt before is
Mm.
I would be going in completely cold and I don't have that the weight of like a big brand name to kind of convince people to be engaged with what it is that I'm trying to change. Have you got any thoughts on how smaller organizations could yeah, make that work for them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been in that position lots of times. And it's actually, I suppose what I would say is that it's really surprising how if the issue really resonates with somebody, um, what they're prepared to do, because a lot of the time we're all working on issues that people really care about. And I think if you approach the people who, yeah, sure, have the skills and the talent that you would love to bring into your campaign, but also to really care about it, about what you're working on, I think that that's the sweet spot. And I think in that case, a cold approach is fine, and I've done it many times. And actually, that's what has brought a lot of the tactics in the presentation to fruition. Like those weren't warm contacts, and they didn't necessarily have the advantage of a brand name either, because so, like people didn't really know what some of those things were until they happened. So I think, yeah, you are asking people to sort of just trust you and have faith in you, but I think you also just need to be smart about who you approach and come to them with your issue and persuade them. And if you've done all of your sort of strategic thinking and you've crafted your story and you're really clear about what you want to achieve and how you think you're going to achieve it, then that's what will bring people on board. So yeah, it's a bit of a pitch that you've
Mm,
got to do, but I think that it's absolutely doable because I've done it lots of times. So yeah, definitely
nice.
have faith in that.
Nice. Thank you so much. I can see another question from Timmy in the chat, but we are at time now. So, Timmy, I might suggest that you take Florence up on her offer of one of those free power hours to get some specific advice. Flo, just before we wrap up, would you mind putting that final slide of your deck just up on the screen for a sec and we'll just wrap up? Brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone. It sounds like everyone's got lots of ideas that they want to go ahead and trial and give a go. And it would be yeah, great to take advantage of that kind offer from Flow. It's just taking a minute to load that's last
Sorry,
slide. So no, it's okay. We can just
went
leave
to
it.
send it round.
No, we can just leave it. It was just to say thank you for coming. And yes, do take Flow up on that kind offer of a power hour, specifically for campaigning. And if you do require any additional hands on deck or support, then do drop us a line at Fair Collective. Always happy to help with whatever it is that you might need some support on. So thank you all for coming. Massive thanks to Flo. Luckily, my 5-year-old has stayed contained within the living room area. So I'll go and see what that looks like now after leaving him on his own for an hour. But yeah, massive thanks, Flo. Thanks for you all coming, and we'll see you very soon. Well, the recording will be available soon, and we'll drop you an email with the resources. See you
Thanks,
later,
everyone.
everyone. Thanks, Flo. See you. Bye.